Most of us are fading away in the hallway. We've walked out of the room that no longer fits us. The career feels like a cage. The version of ourselves that was just fine, but we're terrified to open the next door. So we call it a transition, right? But it's really not a transition. It's a state of paralysis. So the hallway represents the transition from one thing to the next, right? We're moving from one area into another area, and so or one room to another room, right? Essentially, if you look at your office space, in corporate America, if you would, right? You walk through the hallways and you're going from meeting to meeting, right? But it's like you're opening the next door as you're passing through those different hallways, but what ends up happening is it becomes a momentum. It's like the hamster wheel, right? Like we're doing it Monday through Friday, and we're just constantly going through the hallway and going in to open the next door, right? The next door into another meeting, the next door into stagnancy, and still not experiencing that growth that we're expecting. And so what I like to call that is it's the state of paralysis, if you would, right? We've been conditioned to believe that growth is a ladder, one rung after another, right? You go into being just the worker bee, going to now becoming the team lead, or going up the ladder, or each rung representing a different title, right? And that's the constant upward motion that we think is growth. But the real growth is actually in the void. That space where the old you has expired, but the new you hasn't been born yet. And that space is called liminality, right? I know that's probably not widely used term or word that we hear, every single day, right? But I'm gonna go dive deeper into what liminality is, right? And so if we don't learn how to breathe in that vacuum, that space, that void, we're going to stall out before we ever arrive. So what exactly does that mean, right? We have to actually take that breather, live in that moment of the void, live in that space of the in between, if you would, right? Because that's how we're going to be able to assess what's happening around us before we arrive to the next move. So welcome back to Shattered Perspectives. I'm Dr. Rayon Walton. Today we aren't just talking about strategy, but we're talking about the courage to be nowhere, right? To be able to sit in that space. And so we're going to transition to talk about the anatomy of the void, right? Like, why does it feel so heavy right now? How many of us can answer that question, right? We can use different instances about what's happening in our environment or in our space or wherever we find ourselves right now, whether it's the geopolitical spectrum or, things that are happening on the job, at home, at school, right? Like those are the different things that we might probably feel some sense of heaviness right now. And what the thing about it that kind of exacerbates that feeling is the brain is wired for certainty, right? They want to know, hey, you're going to get up at this time, you're going to do this, right? The next move is essentially pre-planned, right? You have a sense of certainty because you have that it wants to have that sense of control. It wants that map, that GPS, that roadmap, right? But in the in between, that liminality, that void, that space, the GPS is broken, right? My wife and I always have this running joke. Oh, you put in a GPS, we're just going right down the street, right? Like, why do you need the GPS? But I understand that there is that level of uncertainty, and I take preparation, right? So my whole dissertation was on resilience, right? So anticipating, coping, and adapting. And so I've really adapted that mentality of, oh, I need to be prepared. I need to be 10 steps ahead in case something happens, right? So what I do is I put the GPS on because I don't know between here and the end of the street, there something might happen, right? I might have to detour. I might have to change the course or pivot, change courses to be able to get to my destination, right? And so the danger, right? So when we don't have that GPS, we find ourselves in that no man's land, right? The danger isn't that we're lost because I hate being lost, right? I don't want to have to figure out where to go if I my GPS is essentially my crutch, if you would, right? But the flip side of the coin, where my wife says, "Oh, you need a GPS," she doesn't use the GPS. She would rather get lost. And I find that fascinating, right? Because in the moments that you're quote unquote lost, your senses are now heightened to try to figure out, okay, well, I knew I left that landmark right there. The McDonald's arches are right there. I have the Chick-fil-A on the corner, and then there's a gas station here, right? Like now I am not reliant on that GPS because the GPS is quote unquote broken. And so the danger isn't that we're lost, but being lost is the actual sign of progress. And so the danger is that you try to build a house in the hallway, right? Like the hallway is built as a measure of transition. It's not supposed to be blockaded by a building, right? It's a rite of passage, if you would. We're trying to transition from one room to the next room. And so you will try to make the temporary permanent because we're tired, right? We want to just keep moving through. We're tired of moving through the dark. So we're just trying to just say, you know what? Let's build this house in the hallway so we don't have to worry about the transition in the dark, right? That void, that liminality space. And so looking at the professional, side of things, right? Like a lot of us are professional waiters, right? We're just waiting for the next move, right? And a lot of us as high performance, we're just professional waiters. We wait for the perfect signal, right? We're waiting for that perfect clarity, but clarity is a reward for movement. We can't just be stagnant and just sit and wait. Well, I'm just gonna. My wife likes to call it riding the wave, right? Like just sit here, ride the wave, right? Instead of us trying to understand and live in that moment and make a determination, assess where we are and determine the next move, right? And it's not a prerequisite, right? The reward, clarity is a reward for movement. And so if we're waiting for the fog to clear before we take the next step, we've already failed. So we have to step into that fog, into that void, into that darkness to make it move, right? We should be constantly moving in that space, taking that time to just rest a little bit in that void, the in between, to assess and find out what's going on in that space, right? And so what we need to do is transition our mindset into what I like to call the identity upgrade, right? Essentially what it is. So you can't enter a new dimension carrying that baggage, that luggage of the version of you that just ended. A lot of us, that's what we're trying to do, right? And I used to do this little, I guess it's a little skit or whatever it is that you want to call it, right? But I used to say blessings, right? When we're holding on so tight to what we think is something we need to hold on to. We can't let this go, right? And so we're carrying that luggage, that version of ourselves that we need to let go, because in order for us to be blessed, sometimes that's what we have to do, right? So we're holding on so tight to this thing, where as if we were to actually open, right? Open up and let this thing go, we'll be able to receive something that's even greater, right? I'm going to use my mouse here for a second, right? So maybe there's something bigger and better that is waiting, but we're constantly holding on to this baggage and carrying that luggage, that version of us that just ended, right? Instead of going through that hallway and transitioning to the next version of you, we think about the person you were 3 years ago, right? You're still trying to use those old tools to build a future that requires a completely different frequency, right? I always, equate it to, like, upgrades for technology, right? Like we have a terminal, we have, a hard drive, right? Like it's going to require a refresh ever so often. I remember being on a call with my website builder, right? And I was just trying to get everything situated, and he wanted to just take, the full control of the computer, right? But it took me almost 30 minutes because I was using old technology, right? And it took about 30 minutes for the computer to start up, and I was like, this guy, is very patient, right? And he's just waiting, 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 until finally, right, then what ended up happening is, because the computer was off and it had to go through all this, I had to find the Wi-Fi and reconnect. So do you see what I'm saying? That there's that luggage, that baggage that didn't fit the moment, right? We're in 2026 and I'm using something that was from 10 years ago. And it took all that, the cobwebs had to be dusted off, it had to be updated, right? And then finally, once that was done, and I got it back to the state in which it needed to be and to perform in the current state, right? That's when things started to shift. So if we're still trying to hold on to those old tools to build the future, that's going to require, we have to change our frequency, right? And so the reason that our growth has stalled is it's not our strategy, a lot of the times it's our ego. We're trying, to be the authority in a space that requires us to be the beginner, right? We're trying to be the master in a space that requires submission, right? There goes that ugly word, submission. And so we're stuck in the in between because we're still holding on to a ghost. We're mourning that version of ourselves, that doesn't even exist anymore, right? So we have to let that go, let the old version fade so that way the new one can take shape, right? So there's a frequency we miss when we're obsessed with the hustle, right? And I'm calling it being caught up in the rapture, right? And it's actually the title, shameless plug here, of my book called Caught Up in the Rapture, right? The cover is going to be changing here soon. But I like it. We're caught up in something. I'm talking about the soul's resonance, right? It's that state of total immersion where the in between stops being a threat and starts being a sanctuary, right? When you're in the liminal space, you're in that in between space, the world loses its grip on you because you're trying to figure it out, right? There's no more noise, the noise of expectation, the pressure of timelines, it all fades. So we do need to rest in that space for a little bit because all that stuff is going to fade. And if we can't find the quote unquote rapture in the waiting, we'll never handle the weight of the winning. I like that right there, right? I'm gonna try to say it again if I can remember, right? But if you can't find the rapture in the waiting, you're never gonna be able to handle the weight of the winning. And it really, thinking about that statement, right? It's like you ever heard people say, well, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, right? We get all these certificates, we get all these degrees, but when it comes time to perform, we don't have that capability because we rushed ourselves through me, ouch, right? Rush ourselves through the process, and then when it's time to perform, we get stuck because we didn't take the time to be, the student, right? We just wanted to be the authority, right? We didn't want to wait. Why do you think it took me almost 6 years to complete my doctorate degree, right? Because I had to be the student. I couldn't be the authority in the leadership space if I didn't go through those, that academic rigor. So we have to really take that time to be, if we're becoming, we have to take time to be the student in that space, right? So the rapture is the peace that comes when you stop fighting the hallway and start listening to what the silence is trying to teach us, right? If we don't have that peace, we're not leading, we're just reacting, right? So we transition to the algorithm of becoming, right? I love that because it's talking about AI, it's talking about social media, it's talking about, these get rich quick schemes. I want to go viral tomorrow, right? Like we live in that world, we live in that space where it's constantly demanding those instant results. And so the algorithm rewards what's done, right? Like I'll use a perfect example. One of my other social media platforms, right? I was in the race. I was literally just racing to get to 10K, right? I got to 10K, then I went down to 9.5K, then I went up to 10K, and it just keeps going back and forth because I didn't have the discipline to retain and maintain what was built. But I rushed to get through it, and I didn't spend the time to actually build, something that was sustainable, right? So that's why I'm saying we have to do, the algorithm wants to get it done, get to the 10K, boom. And so what happens when you get to the 10K? Then you need 100,000 views to be able to get monetized, right? It's just so much going on, but the universe rewards the becoming. If I would have taken that time and actually built the relationships that I should have built, then maybe I would have had retained the 10K or higher, right? But the universe actually rewards the becoming. It's building those relationships because we become addicted to the dopamine of the destination, right? I just want to get there. I just want the certification. I want the degrees. I want all that stuff. I want to go through all of the actually learning what I'm supposed to be doing, right? But the destination is a mirage. As soon as you arrive, the in between starts all over again, right? Because now you have to take a step back. You did 10 steps forward, now you got to do 10 steps backwards to be able to catch up or to be able to actually understand. I'll use another example, right? I'm in a mentorship program, and essentially, they gave us these 10 modules to go through, right? And I'm like, okay, there we go, there I go again. I want to get it done, right? Like, boom, I'm gonna show them I got it done. I got through all 10. But then when it came time for me to actually perform, I had to go back, right? To start back at one, right? So that's what it is. We have to really take that time. As soon as you arrive, the in between starts all over again, right? If you hate the hallway, you're going to hate your entire life, because life is 90% hallway and 10% rooms, because you're taking that opportunity to build that character. You're building that person that is going to be the one that is in the room, that's going to be the one leading in these rooms. And so if we don't take those times to transition into these different spaces and to go through the process, right? People say trust the process, right? That's exactly what that means. And if we can't find joy in the not yet, we're going to be miserable when we finally get there, right? Because there's just another here with more expensive problems, right? I can say ouch to that one. But there is a sovereignty in silence, right? We're going to talk about that really quick, right? So remember, sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do is nothing, right? You're like, wow, this doesn't make any sense. The most disruptive thing you can do is nothing. Unpack that, for me, Rayon. Like, what exactly does that mean, right? Right now, if you think about what's happening is, right, even if as you're listening to this podcast, your mind is in 8 million different places, right? The world is screaming for our attention, right? Did I get my social media likes today? Did I post the content? Right? Like, those are the things that it's just constantly, because the world is screaming for our attention, but your vision is whispering for your presence. Be in that moment. Take care of the things that we need to take care of, right? In the liminal space, that in between, the silence is where the strategy is born. If you're too busy talking or listening to the noise of social media and going through all the motions, right, you're not going to be able to hear the instructions for the next level, right? So I always tell people that the difference between activity and progress, right? Don't confuse activity with progress, right? Think about the hamster wheel. I love this analogy, right? The hamster is on a wheel, is active, but it's not going anywhere, right? So stop running and start standing, right? The hallway isn't a race; it's an evaluation. I like to call it an evolution, really, right? So and the final manifesto, if you would, right? Like, stop looking for the exit, start looking for the expansion. The danger, quote unquote, of the in between isn't that you're lost, it's that you'll get so comfortable being stuck that you forget you weren't meant to pass through. You were meant to pass through, excuse me. The door behind you didn't just close, it vanished. So there's no going back, right, to the way things were. There is only the through, the passage through that hallway, right? So you are the architect of this transition, right? No one else is coming to save you. You have to be the architect here, right? So you want to make sure that you're building something that can hold weight, for your future, right? So keep that in mind. Again, I am Dr. Rayon Walton. You've been listening to the Shattered Perspectives. Stop trying to arrive and start being willing to transform. Catch you in the next one.